third week. Estimates put the number of deaths nationwide at over 185,000 people. Also, over 1 million people have been left homeless and around 250,000 people have left the country since the start of the war. Absolute shocking figures, and it only looks to get worse as the intensity in fighting increases across the country. The highest number of casualties have been in, unsurprisingly, the worst affected states. Those being Nevada, Idaho, Oklahoma, and South Carolina, though of course every state has experienced its fair share of fighting. The president has said that despite large swathes of the country being under militia control, the military is winning and will ultimately win this war. This comes as speculation increases that some military personnel are refusing to fight against their own countrymen, and some are sympathizing with the militias. The president has warned that any military personnel who refuse to fulfill their duty of protecting the country will be court-martialed and given the death penalty if found guilty. The president made good on his word this morning when a naval officer who refused to fire on a militia ship in the Gulf of Mexico last week was executed by firing squad. The reintroduction of death by firing squad was introduced on the fourth day of the war for those deemed enemies of the state. Since then, only two people, one being the naval officer and the other being a 25-year-old Marine from Texas, have been executed by firing squad. The president said that intelligence suggests that some members of the military were involved in the attack on the White House on Tuesday afternoon when members of a militia stormed the grounds of the White House and gained access to the residence shortly after. Within 5 minutes, smoke could be seen rising from the roof of the White House as shots rang out around the property. 8 security service personnel were killed in the attack, with one being shot execution style in the back of the head on the lawns of the White House. The president was not present at the White House at the time, nor were any members of his family. But he has said that the punishment for those responsible for the attack will be swift and deadly. The current whereabouts of the president is unknown as fighting rages within the capital. With numerous militias joining forces, they are rolling through the streets in black armored vehicles and black battle tanks, the color that has become synonymous with the revolution. The militia's acquirement of battle tanks in many states have confirmed reports that sources within the military are providing some militias with military-grade weapons. The militia faction based in northern Alabama known as Upholders of the Constitution were even seen flying over Huntsville in an H-64 Apache helicopter, which was spray-painted black. Huntsville is currently under full militia control with huge support from local communities there for the militias, with thousands of gun owners in the area taking up arms against the military. The military admitted that military operations in the area had ceased for the time being, but that the full recapturing of Huntsville is only a matter of time. During the 8 days of fighting there, over 1,000 people were killed, including 216 military personnel. So things may be calm in Huntsville for the time being. But the same can't be said for many other cities across America where the fighting continues and the intensity of it increases. This follows reports from Phoenix, Arizona, where in the last hour videos have been circulating online of buildings in downtown Phoenix crumbling and falling like dominoes after numerous airstrikes by the military. The military released a statement saying that militias in the area had taken over entire apartment complexes and that warnings to evacuate were given to residents prior to the strikes. Locals, however, said that very little time was given to evacuate and that hundreds of people, including children, are now buried beneath the rubble of destroyed buildings. Rescue efforts have been halted as fighting continues within the city, with militias in the area showing a huge amount of firepower. Videos online show dozens of injured soldiers being stretchered through the streets while under fire from the militias. Our correspondent Michael Hardmore described the scenes as like something out of the last days of Berlin. The streets of Phoenix covered in blood, dust, and rubble as screams and gunfire continue in the background. A military chopper was seen plummeting to the ground after being shot out of the sky by militias, and some estimates put the number of deaths at over 2,000 in just over 3 hours of fighting. That number is expected to rise as military reinforcements make their way to the area in an attempt to retake a city they say is a hub of militia activity and a breeding ground for terrorists. Many angry locals, however, have sworn to take up weapons and fight on the side of the militias after the airstrikes by the military on residential buildings, which could possibly have killed hundreds of innocent civilians. This battle has already been described as possibly the biggest battle of the war so far, and fears of this level of fighting spreading across America and other cities is now widespread. The brutal measures taken by government in trying to stamp out this uprising has only seemed to backfire on the government as thousands of Americans continue to join militias across the country on a daily basis. This current situation in Phoenix, with reports of so many civilian deaths, will only bolster support for the militias. It's been reported that militias are recruiting people as young as 13, and the president has said this goes to show the level of disregard the militias have for human life. A militia faction based in North Carolina, however, released a statement saying that those being recruited at the age of 13 and 14 had as much of a right to defend their country against tyranny as anyone else. This war was, of course, sparked by the introduction of nationwide martial law, which was viewed as unwarranted by millions of Americans and a power grab by a rising totalitarian system of corporate elites. Militias nationwide have vowed to fight until the very end, saying that the conflict will continue until the treacherous infestation of global elitists in American politics are removed from power. They have demanded that the president step down, saying that he will remove himself from power or they will do it for him. The president did not respond to the demands when questioned about it, but instead addressed the ban on travel to and from the United States. Since March 3rd, there has been a ban on all commercial planes, and ships entering and leaving the country. According to the president, this is to stop the influx of those coming from abroad to join illegal organizations, meaning the militias, and also to stop military personnel from leaving the country and evading their duties of defending the country. This, however, hasn't stopped hundreds of thousands of Americans from attempting to leave the country, and the president has said that those found guilty of violating the travel ban could face up to 10 years in prison. Last week, a ship carrying 317 passengers in the Gulf of Mexico was sank by the Navy after refusing orders to stop. 191 people were killed in the incident, including 63 children. Of those on board were mostly family trying to make their way to Mexico after fighting erupted in Central Florida. In relation to the incident, the president said that although it was tragic and extremely saddening that so many children had lost their lives, ultimately it was the parents who were to blame because they had willingly broken the law in a time of national emergency and put the lives of their children at risk. The words of the president were met with extreme anger across the country, and as a result, further rioting broke out, resulting in the deaths of over 800 people over a 4-day period. Many of those killed were young people who were apparently part of more-raiding gangs who were looting shops throughout American cities and were shot by shop owners trying to protect their property. Many, however, have disagreed, saying the majority of those killed were peaceful protesters who posed no threat and were shot dead by riot police. The riots left thousands of supermarkets throughout the country without food and basic necessities because of widespread looting, and with the transportation of goods at a minimum because of the dangers of traveling through potential conflict zones. The supply of food throughout the country is a real concern at the moment. Millions of Americans are already saying that they are running dangerously low on food, and panic is breaking out as the World Food Program warns that famine across the country is a real possibility if supplies do not start getting through to the worst affected areas very soon. Already the amount of people left homeless because of this war is in the millions, as community after community is left devastated by the fighting. Earlier we saw footage of numerous suburbs on the outskirts of Los Angeles, which were absolutely flattened during the early stages of this war, and kids rummaging through the trash and rubble in search of their next meal. Absolutely heartbreaking scenes there, and those scenes are being mirrored all over the country, despite the president saying that aid is getting through to the areas that need it most. Many, however, are saying that is simply not true, and that their communities are on the brink of starvation. So as we see, this war is not just simply affecting those directly involved in the fighting. It is having widespread consequences for everybody, and in fact it is those who are simply just trying to get by who are suffering the most. Many leaders around the world are calling on the president to negotiate with the militias and strike a peace deal. However, the president has reiterated that he will, quote, never ever negotiate with terrorists. The British Prime Minister supported the president's decision, saying that the militias were nothing but terrorists, and that an attack on one democracy was an attack on all. The British Prime Minister is facing his own problems in Britain, where anti-government sentiment is growing and support for the militias amongst the British public is at an all-time high. A recent poll suggesting that 59% of Britons support or sympathize with the militias. There is fear around the world that the war could spark other conflicts around the world with mass anti-government protests taking place across Europe and South America. Some of these protests have turned violent, with protesters clashing with riot police in many European cities. 17 police officers have also been killed during protests that turned violent in Brazil and Colombia. But anyway, back to the situation here, where updates are coming through on the fierce battle taking place in Phoenix, Arizona. Locals are now taking part in the fight against the military. Northern Phoenix is apparently under full militia control. This is despite continued airstrikes by the military and a massive ground offensive which is currently underway. Reports and footage suggest that this is by far the largest battle of the war so far, and that the number of casualties are well into the thousands. Drone footage shows the devastation that has been brought on the city in the space of just a few hours.